The weight of the diamonds around her neck felt heavier than the weight of the city's expectations. For Aurora Winslow tonight was supposed to be a triumph, her first major appearance since announcing her pregnancy. But as her billionaire husband Radley scanned her with a look of cold appraisal, she knew it was just another stage for her public trial. He saw her burgeoning belly not as the vessel of his heir, but as a flaw in his perfect aesthetic. He wanted a trophy, and tonight she felt like a tarnished one. Little did he know the woman he was about to humiliate in front of New York's elite was not the fragile ornament he believed her to be. She was the architect of his downfall. The air in the Fifth Avenue penthouse was so sterile it seemed to suck the warmth from Aurora's skin. It was the kind of clean that didn't come from scrubbing, but from a lack of life, a curated emptiness where every surface gleamed, and no object was ever out of place. It was Radley's world, and she was just his most expensive and currently most disappointing acquisition. Aurora stood before the full-length gilt-edged mirror, her hands resting protectively on the gentle curve of her stomach. 5 months. 5 months of carrying their son, a tiny, fluttering life that felt like the only real thing in this mausoleum of wealth. The dress she wore was a custom-made silk gown in a deep sapphire, designed by a Parisian couturier Radley had on speed dial. It was meant to be elegant to skim and conceal, but there was no concealing the truth of her changing body. "Is that what you're wearing?" Radley's voice sliced through the silence from the doorway of the master suite's cavernous dressing room. He wasn't looking at her, but at her reflection, his brow furrowed in distaste. Radley Winslow was a man sculpted by ambition and privilege. His suit was Savile Row. His watch was a Patek Philippe, and his expression was one of perpetual low-grade disappointment in a world that rarely met his standards. "You picked it out?" "Radley." Aurora replied, her voice soft, practiced in the art of de-escalation. "I picked it out with the expectation that it would present you better," he said finally, turning his gaze to her. He gestured vaguely at her midsection. "It makes you look substantial, matronly." The word hung in the air, a poison dart. Matronly. She was 28 years old. Before Radley, she had been a promising art historian, her mind sharp and her spirit vibrant. Now she was an accessory, and a matronly one at that. "I'm pregnant, Radley," she said the words, feeling foolishly obvious. "I'm acutely aware," he snapped, adjusting his cufflinks. "This is the Metropolitan Legacy Gala Aurora. It's not a PTA meeting. My mother will be there. Gregory Pike is bringing a delegation from Singapore. Every eye in the financial world will be on us tonight. On me. I need you to look the part. The part of what the flawless, wafer-thin woman he'd married 2 years ago. The woman who could discuss 17th century art and global market trends with equal ease, all while maintaining a size 0. That woman had been slowly eroded, chipped away by his constant critiques, his subtle manipulations, his relentless focus on the superficial. He walked over his expensive cologne preceding him. He didn't touch her belly. He never did. Instead, he reached up and fingered the simple string of pearls at her throat. They had been her grandmother's Margaret Price's. The only piece of jewelry she owned that wasn't chosen by Radley. "And take those off," he commanded, his voice losing its edge and taking on a tone of weary instruction, as if teaching a child. "They're quaint. Sentimental. Wear the diamonds I bought you in Geneva. They match the brand. The brand. That's what their marriage was. Winslow Industries, a legacy he'd inherited and expanded with ruthless aggression, was his empire. He was the king, and she was his queen, meant to be draped in the spoils of his corporate warfare. Aurora felt a familiar wave of resignation wash over her. It was easier to comply. Arguing only led to colder silences to him, sleeping in one of the other 5 bedrooms, to a chill that was far worse than the pristine air conditioning. She unclasped her grandmother's pearls, the familiar smooth orbs feeling warm against her cold skin. She placed them carefully in their velvet box, a small act of surrendering a piece of herself. As she fastened the cold, heavy diamond necklace, its fire felt garish against her skin. Each stone felt like a link in a chain. She met her own eyes in the mirror. The vibrant young woman was gone, replaced by a ghost with tired eyes and a forced smile. But deep within, beneath the layers of silk and diamonds and resignation, the flutter of her baby reminded her that something was still hers, a secret strength, a reason to endure. Better, Radley pronounced, giving her a curt nod. Now let's go. And Aurora. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Tonight, try to fit in, mingle, laugh at the right jokes. Don't just stand in a corner talking about dead painters. And for God's sake, don't talk about the pregnancy unless someone asks. It's unbecoming. He left, leaving her alone in the cavernous room. She took one last look at herself. The sapphire dress, the blinding diamonds, the carefully styled hair. She was the perfect picture of a billionaire's wife. But the illusion was cracking, and tonight she had a feeling it was going to shatter completely. For the first time in a long time, the thought didn't fill her with terror. It filled her with a strange, terrifying hope. She placed a hand back on her belly, a silent promise to the life within. This isn't our life. Not forever. The limousine slid through the streets of Manhattan like a silent black shark parting a sea of yellow cabs and city buses. Inside, the silence was as thick and suffocating as the city's summer humidity. Radley was on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, a scowl etched onto his handsome face. Aurora watched the glittering lights of the city blur past, feeling a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She had spent the last hour with her best friend and lawyer, Beatrice Bayard Chen, on a video call under the guise of discussing a charity art auction. Bee's voice had been the anchor in her swirling anxiety. Remember the plan, Aurora Bear had said, her face calm and resolute on the tablet screen. Let him play his part. Let him think he's in complete control. Every word he says tonight, every condescending glance, is just more evidence. The board needs to see it. The world needs to see it. You are not the victim here. You are the strategist. The words had sounded so brave then. Now, sitting beside the architect of her misery, Aurora felt her resolve waver. She was a strategist about to walk into the heart of the enemy's territory. The car pulled up to the curb in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A river of paparazzi flashbulbs erupted, a blinding, violent strobe that made Aurora flinch. Radley, however, came alive. He straightened his tie, a practiced, charming smile, instantly replacing his scowl. This was his element. He stepped out of the car and offered her a hand, his grip firm, proprietary. It wasn't a gesture of support. It was a command. Perform. She took his hand and stepped onto the red carpet. The roar of the photographers was deafening. Radley, Aurora. Over here. Names and flashes assaulted them from all sides. Radley guided her through the chaos with an expert's ease. his hand a constant pressure on the small of her back. He smiled, he waved, he was the picture of the benevolent king. Aurora forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. Inside the great hall had been transformed into a celestial wonderland. Cascading strings of fairy lights glittered like constellations from the high vaulted ceiling. The city's old money and new tech mingled a cacophony of champagne flutes, discreet gossip, and the rustle of couture. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. Radley Darling. A woman with a face pulled taut by surgery and ambition descended upon them. Camilla Winslow, Radley's mother. She kissed the air beside Radley's cheek before her cold, critical eyes landed on Aurora. Aurora Camilla said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How lovely you look. We were all so surprised to hear your news." Her eyes flickered down to Aurora's belly with the subtlest hint of disapproval, as if a pregnancy was a social faux pas. "It's a wonderful blessing, Camilla," Aurora replied, her voice steady. "Of course," dear Camilla said already, turning her attention back to Radley, dismissing Aurora as if she were a piece of furniture. "Gregory Pike is over by the Temple of Dendur. He's been asking for you. Something about the Singapore deal." As Radley was pulled away into a circle of dark-suited men, Aurora was left adrift. This was the moment she dreaded most at these events. Radley would be holding court, basking in the glow of power and influence, while she was expected to. What makes small talk with the wives about decorators and summering in the Hamptons? She felt like a fraud. Her mind, once filled with art history and critical theory, felt dull and slow. Pregnancy brain, people called it. Aurora suspected it was survival mode. She found a relatively quiet spot near a towering Roman statue, hoping to become invisible. But there was no hiding tonight. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Winslow gracing us with her presence." The voice was sleek and condescending. Aurora turned to see Victoria Beaumont, her smile as sharp and bright as a shard of glass. Victoria was a rising star in the cutthroat world of PR, known for her ambition and her impeccably tailored outfits. She was also, as Aurora had known for the past 6 months, Radley's mistress. Aurora had found the evidence accidentally a credit card statement, with charges for a suite at the Carlyle on a night Radley was supposedly in Chicago. A stray text message glimpsed over his shoulder, ending with a single damning X. She'd never confronted him. What was the point? He would have lied, gaslighted her, made her feel insane for even suspecting. Instead, she'd called B, and they had started to plan. Victoria Aurora said, her tone neutral. Victoria's eyes, a cold, calculating blue, raked over Aurora's body. "Pregnancy certainly agrees with you." She purred, the compliment laced with venom. "You look so comfortable." It was the same insult as Radley's, just wrapped in a prettier package. Before Aurora could respond, Radley reappeared, his arm sliding possessively around Victoria's waist. It was a casual, familiar gesture that sent a fresh stab of pain through Aurora's chest, despite everything she knew. He didn't even glance at his wife. "Vicky, darling," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. "Gregory was just saying how brilliant your last press campaign was." "I aim to please Victoria," said, leaning into him, her red lacquered nails resting on his lapel. It was a brazen public display. They were standing mere feet from her, a tableau of betrayal for anyone to see. And people were seeing it. Aurora could feel the weight of their stares, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and schadenfreude. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. Then Radley turned, as if suddenly remembering she was there. A cruel, smug smile played on his lips. He looked from the sleek, predatory form of Victoria to the softly rounded shape of his pregnant wife. He leaned in his voice just loud enough for the nearby clusters of people to hear. Aurora. You've met Victoria, of course. She's the one who keeps the Winslow brand looking sharp and forward-thinking, he said. Then he gestured toward Aurora, a theatrical sweep of his hand. And this is my wife, Aurora. She's embracing a more traditional role. He paused for effect, his eyes glittering with malice. It's important to have someone who looks to the future. He continued, his gaze fixed on Victoria, and someone to represent the past, the domestic, someone who doesn't quite fit in with the pace of modern life anymore, but we keep her around for sentimental value. The words were a physical blow. A collective, quiet gasp rippled through the people closest to them. Someone tittered nervously. Victoria's smile widened, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes. Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to tilt, the glittering light swimming before her eyes. He hadn't just insulted her. He had crucified her. He had publicly declared her obsolete, a relic he kept out of pity while anointing her replacement right in front of her. The cruelty was so breathtaking, so absolute, it stole the air from her lungs. She looked at his face, at the man she had once loved, and saw only a stranger, a monster clad in a bespoke suit. The pain was immense, a white-hot agony that threatened to consume her. But then she felt it, a tiny, indignant flutter from within her womb. Her son. And through the pain, through the humiliation, B's words echoed in her mind. You are the strategist. She straightened her spine. She lifted her chin. She did not cry. She met Radley's cold, triumphant gaze with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was not anger, not sadness. It was a chilling, absolute calm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the awkward silence. "I need some water." Without another glance at him or at the smug face of his mistress, she turned and walked away. Every step was a battle against the urge to run, to crumble. She could feel the eyes of the entire room on her back, a physical weight of judgment and pity. But she did not falter. She was walking towards the stage, towards the podium, where the night's host was about to begin the main presentation. She was walking towards the end of her old life. The performance was over. The real show was about to begin. Aurora moved through the glittering crowd like a phantom. The whispers followed her, trailing in her wake like the train of a funeral dress. "Did you hear what he said? How dreadful." Well, she has let herself go. Each comment was a small sting, but they barely registered. The colossal public wound Radley had inflicted had cauterized all smaller pains. She didn't get water. She found her seat at the Winslow Industries table, a prime spot near the front of the stage. The chair felt cold against her legs. She sat with a ramrod straight posture, her hands clasped in her lap over her baby bump. From this vantage point, she could see Radley and Victoria still holding court, laughing together. They looked like the power couple the future. She, sitting alone, looked like the discarded past he had so cruelly described. The lights in the great hall began to dim, casting the room in an expectant hush. A single brilliant spotlight hit the stage. Out walked a woman who commanded attention without demanding it. She was Genevieve Dubois, the chairwoman of the Gala, a legendary figure in New York philanthropy, known for her sharp intellect and even sharper tongue. She was in her late 60s with a sweep of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Genevieve tapped the microphone, a crisp sound that silenced the remaining murmurs. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala. She began her voice a rich, cultured alto. Tonight we celebrate not just the art that enriches our lives, but the generosity that preserves it for generations to come. Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she and Bea had spent months preparing for. It all hinged on Genevieve. Genevieve spoke of the museum's new initiatives, the outreach programs, the acquisitions made possible by their donors. Radley sat down at the table, taking the seat opposite Aurora. Victoria slid gracefully into the chair beside him, placing her hand on his arm. He didn't acknowledge his wife. His focus was entirely on the stage, an arrogant smirk on his face, expecting Winslow Industries to be lauded for its significant contribution. He believed he had bought his legacy. Our main project this year. Genevieve continued the complete restoration of the Antiquities Wing, was an ambitious, almost impossible task. It required a benefactor of extraordinary vision and even more extraordinary discretion. For months, this benefactor has wished to remain anonymous. Radley preened, subtly adjusting his tie. He had made a large, tax-deductible donation. He assumed she was talking about him. He caught Aurora's eye across the table and gave her a look of pure, condescending pity, as if to say, "This is my world, a world you can no longer keep up with." Tonight, however, Genevieve said, a sly smile touching her lips, "Our benefactor has agreed to be acknowledged. This restoration, this gift to the city of New York, was made possible by a single visionary entity, a new force in global finance that has in a very short time demonstrated a commitment not just to profit, but to cultural preservation." A murmur went through the audience. This was not the usual list of corporate sponsors. This was something different. The firm responsible for this incredible act of philanthropy is Ethelred Capital, Genevieve announced. Aurora saw a flicker of confusion on Radley's face. He'd never heard of them. He prided himself on knowing every major player. Who were they? He glanced around as if searching for a rival. Ethelred Capital, Genevieve went on, her eyes scanning the room. Has also been making significant strategic moves in the market. In fact, just this afternoon, they finalized a quiet, months-long acquisition that will reshape the corporate landscape of this city. The atmosphere was electric. This was more than a charity speech. It was a bombshell. Aurora watched Radley's face. The confusion was hardening into suspicion. He leaned over to his mother, Camilla, and whispered something. Camilla just shook her head, her face pale. Ethelred. Capital. Genevieve said, her voice ringing with authority, is now the majority shareholder of one of our nation's most storied firms, Winslow Industries. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where the air had been sucked out of the room. Aurora could hear the blood pounding in her own ears. Radley froze. His face went slack, the color draining from it, until his skin was the shade of ash. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His company, his legacy, his name. Acquired. By whom? How? It was impossible. He was the shark, not the prey. He stared at Genevieve, his mouth slightly agape. Then his eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for an answer. A culprit. Who would dare? Who had the power? His gaze fell on his rival Gregory Pike, who simply stared back, his expression one of utter shock. It wasn't him. Genevieve let the shock settle for a perfect dramatic beat. And the visionary, fiercely private owner of Ethelred Capital, the woman who now controls the future of Winslow Industries and who funded our beautiful new wing, is with us tonight, she said, her voice building to a crescendo. Every head in the room turned, trying to guess. Radley's frantic gaze landed on Victoria. Of course, it had to be a mistake. Ethelred Capital must be a shell company for him, set up by his lawyers for some arcane tax reason he hadn't been briefed on. And this host, this woman, must have gotten her wires crossed. She was supposed to name him. In his panic, his mind fabricated the only reality he could grasp. Genevieve held up a cue card. It is my distinct honor to introduce the driving force behind it all. Please stand and be recognized. Ms. Victoria Beaumont. Time seemed to warp. For a split second, the name hung in the air, a nonsensical arrangement of syllables. Victoria Beaumont. Victoria, who had been basking in the reflected glory of Radley's power, froze mid-sip of her champagne. Her eyes widened. The name registered, but the meaning did not. It was like hearing a foreign language she almost understood. Radley stared at her, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and dawning misplaced relief. Victoria. Was this some bizarre, elaborate power play she had orchestrated for him? A surprise. It made no sense, but it was the only lifeline his drowning ego could grasp. He thought, clever girl. She put it in her name for secrecy. He started to form a proud, relieved smile. The spotlight, which had been on Genevieve, swung across the room. It swept past a table of bankers over a celebrated actress and landed with pinpoint accuracy directly on Victoria Beaumont. The brilliant white light hit her like a physical force. One moment she was a guest, the next she was the specimen. Hundreds of pairs of eyes. The eyes of New York's most powerful and influential people were fixed on her. They were looking at her not as Radley Winslow's beautiful mistress, but as the new titan of industry, the mysterious owner of Ethelred Capital, the woman who had just swallowed his company whole. Victoria's face was a mask of utter bewilderment. Her perfectly painted smile faltered, then vanished. She looked at Radley, her eyes wide, with a silent, desperate question. What is happening? Radley just stared back, his own expression a chaotic mix of confusion and expectation. From the stage, Genevieve beamed. Ms. Beaumont, please take a bow. Your generosity and business acumen are astounding. A smattering of polite, confused applause started. Victoria was trapped. The light was blinding, the stares were suffocating. The name on the host's lips was hers. But the identity was alien. Owner of Ethelred Capital Majority, shareholder of Winslow Industries. She ran a PR firm. She managed narratives and schmoozed journalists. She didn't orchestrate multi-billion-dollar hostile takeovers. The pressure mounted in her chest. The applause grew louder as people, assuming this was all part of a grand plan, joined in. She was supposed to stand. She was supposed to smile graciously. She was supposed to be the powerful, mysterious woman Genevieve was describing. But she wasn't. Her mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Was this a joke? A cruel, elaborate prank? Was Radley testing her? Her gaze flickered from Radley's stunned face to the calm, implacable woman on the stage, and then finally across the table to Aurora. Aurora was just sitting there, her hands still resting on her belly, watching. There was no shock on her face, no surprise. There was only a quiet, knowing stillness. And in that moment, a sliver of terrifying truth began to wedge its way into Victoria's consciousness. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a prank. This was a chess move, and she was just a pawn. She had been used. The room began to spin. The faces in the crowd blurred into a grotesque swirl of jewels and judgment. The applause sounded like rushing water in her ears. The weight of an identity she couldn't claim, the public proclamation of a power she didn't possess. The sudden horrifying realization that she was a puppet in a play she didn't even know she was in. It was all too much. Her breath hitched. A small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one holding the champagne flute, trembled violently, sloshing golden liquid onto the white tablecloth. Her eyes rolled back in her head. And as the city's elite looked on Victoria Beaumont, the woman named as the new Queen of New York, Finance slumped sideways in her chair and fainted dead away, collapsing in a heap of designer silk and shattered composure. The gala erupted. The applause died instantly, replaced by gasps and shouts. People leaped to their feet. Waitstaff hurried forward. Radley, jolted from his stupor, yelled her name, Victoria, and rushed to her side, a look of pure panic on his face. The spotlight remained fixed on the empty chair and the chaotic scene around it. In the midst of the pandemonium, Aurora Winslow did not move. She simply watched the man who had publicly destroyed her minutes earlier, now desperately tending to the woman he had chosen over her, completely oblivious to the fact that they were both just puppets whose strings had been cut. The strategist B had called her. Aurora finally understood what it meant. It meant watching your enemies self-destruct right on schedule. The chaos around the Winslow table was a vortex of frantic energy. Radley was kneeling beside Victoria, fumbling to loosen the collar of her dress, shouting for a doctor. Camilla Winslow was fanning her own face with a program, her expression one of horrified scandal. The beautiful dramatic scene Victoria's collapse had created was precisely the distraction Aurora had counted on. On stage, Genevieve Dubois handled the disruption with the poise of a seasoned general. It seems the excitement of the evening has been a little overwhelming for Miss Beaumont, she said calmly into the microphone, her voice cutting through the noise. Let's give her some space, please. The staff and medical personnel are here to assist. She waited a beat as Victoria began to stir, aided by Radley and a physician who had been seated nearby. The immediate crisis was passing, but the larger question still hung thick and unanswered in the air. Genevieve raised a hand for silence. The room, still buzzing slowly, quieted down, all eyes turning back to her. They had witnessed the drama, now they craved the explanation. My deepest apologies for the confusion, Genevieve said, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of steel. It appears there may have been a misinterpretation on Miss Beaumont's part. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Misinterpretation. Genevieve looked down at her cue card again, as if to double-check. The pressures of such a momentous announcement are of course immense. Perhaps I should have been clearer. She paused, letting the suspense build to an almost unbearable peak. Radley, helping a dazed and mortified Victoria to her feet, froze and looked toward the stage. His nightmare wasn't over. Ethelred Capital is indeed a profoundly private organization, Genevieve explained, her voice deliberate and clear. So private, in fact, that it operates through a series of legal firewalls and proxies. The name given to me, the principal of Ethelred, the true architect of this acquisition and this magnificent donation, was not meant to be a proxy. It was meant to be a person. She looked directly, unequivocally, at the Winslow table. Not at Radley. Not at the shambles where Victoria had been. Her gaze settled with profound and unmistakable intent on the silent, composed, pregnant woman who had not moved an inch. "There seems to be a mistake on my card," Genevieve announced, though her confident tone suggested there was no mistake at all. "The name isn't Beaumont. It's Winslow." "Ladies and gentlemen, the owner of Ethelred Capital and the new majority shareholder of Winslow Industries is Mrs. Aurora Winslow." If the previous announcement had caused a shockwave, this one was a seismic event. 1,000 minds in the room struggled to process the information. Aurora Winslow. The quiet wife. The matronly sentimental accessory. Radley had just mocked and dismissed the woman who didn't fit in. The spotlight operator, recovering from the previous chaos, swung the beam away from the disgraced Victoria and landed it squarely on Aurora. And the world saw not the timid, humiliated woman from 20 minutes ago. They saw a queen. Aurora blinked slowly, adjusting to the brilliant light. Her expression was serene, her posture regal. The sapphire dress no longer looked like an ill-fitting garment. It looked like royal attire. The diamonds around her neck were not a heavy chain, but a crown. Her pregnancy was not a domestic flaw. It was the symbol of a dynasty she now controlled. Radley had straightened up, his hands dropping from Victoria. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at his wife. The blood had drained from his face again, leaving behind a pallid mask of disbelief. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Aurora, as if seeing her for the very first time. He was looking at a complete stranger who wore his wife's face. The gentle art historian, the compliant wife, the woman he had molded and controlled and broken. It was all a lie. A magnificent, devastating lie. Aurora met his gaze across the table. In her eyes, there was no gloating, no triumph, no desire for revenge. There was only a come quiet finality. It was the look of a game master whose checkmate had just been played. The room was utterly silent for a long moment. Then from a table near the back, a single person began to clap. It was Bia Chen Aurora's lawyer, her face glowing with pride. The sound broke the spell. Someone else joined in, then another and another. The applause was tentative at first, born of shock. But it grew. It grew into a wave, a thunderous ovation far louder and more genuine than the one offered to Victoria. They weren't just clapping for a donation or a business deal. They were clapping for the sheer audacious brilliance of the drama they had just witnessed. They were clapping for the mouse that had revealed herself to be a lioness. Aurora gave a small, graceful nod, a gesture of acknowledgement to the room, but aimed directly at her husband. She had taken everything from him. His company, his power, his public image, and she had done it on his stage in front of his world, using his own cruelty as the trigger. Victoria, now fully conscious, stared at Aurora, her face a canvas of dawning horror. She finally understood. The misdirected announcement wasn't an accident. It was a calculated cruelty, a mirror image of the humiliation Radley had inflicted on Aurora. Aurora had used her, the mistress, as the final humiliating tool to break Radley, exposing her as nothing more than a temporary amusement in a much larger game. Radley stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond financial ruin. It was the terror of a man who realizes he has been comprehensively outthought, outmaneuvered, and utterly destroyed by the one person in the world he never even saw as a player. The ovation, once a thunderous roar, eventually softened, fragmenting into 1,000 excited whispers that filled the great hall with a palpable electric energy. The rest of the gala's formal program was rendered obsolete. Desserts went untouched. Champagne flutes were refilled with haste, and the string quartet's gentle music was completely drowned out. The only story, the only currency of conversation being traded in fervent undertones at every table, was the astonishing coup d'etat that had unfolded at table 12. Aurora remained seated a small island of profound calm in the swirling sea of speculation. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a film of her own life. People looked at her differently now. The pitying glances were gone, replaced by expressions of awe, fear, and ravenous curiosity. A few brave souls, mostly titans of industry, who recognized a seismic power shift when they saw one, approached her table. They offered clipped, respectful congratulations, their eyes searching hers for a hint of her next move. She accepted their words with a polite, enigmatic nod, saying little. Her performance wasn't for them. She was waiting for the final act, the one-on-one confrontation that was both inevitable and necessary. She didn't have to wait long. Across the room, she saw Radley. He had just finished bundling a pale, trembling Victoria into a waiting car, dispatching his mistress with the same dismissive haste he might use to send away a catering error. Now he turned back towards the museum entrance, his face a thunderous mask of pure, unrestrained fury. His Savile Row suit looked rumpled. His tie was slightly askew, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled from where he had repeatedly run his hands through it in frantic disbelief. He looked like a man who had been caught in a hurricane. He strode back into the hall, ignoring the way the crowds parted for him, the whispers intensifying in his wake. His mother, Camilla, intercepted him, her face a mask of panic and social ruin. "Radley, what is going on?" "You must fix this." She pleaded, her voice a sharp hiss. He brushed past her without a word, his eyes locked on Aurora. He saw nothing else. Not the curious stares, not the ruined Gala, not his distraught mother. He saw only the woman who sat at the center of his demolished world. He stormed towards the table, his powerful stride radiating a rage that was almost a physical force. "Outside. Now." He hissed the two words, slicing through the air, low and shaking with a violence he barely kept contained. Aurora looked up at him. The man she had once loved, the man whose approval she had craved, was gone. In his place was a cornered animal, all bared teeth and wounded pride. She felt a flicker of the old fear, a conditioned response from years of walking on eggshells, but it was extinguished as quickly as it came. She placed a hand on her belly, the steady, rhythmic life within her, a potent anchor. This was for him. This was for their future. Slowly, deliberately, Aurora pushed her chair back. She rose to her feet with a newfound grace, her movements unhurried, imbued with an authority that was entirely her own. She was no longer the wife being summoned. She was the queen, granting an audience. Without a word, she walked past him, her sapphire gown rustling softly, and led the way towards a set of heavy oak doors she knew led to a quiet, private corridor. It overlooked the museum's darkened gardens, a place of silent, sleeping beauty. The contrast felt appropriate. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind them, sealing them in a sound-proofed silence, Radley's carefully maintained facade shattered into a million pieces. "What have you done?" he snarled, advancing on her. His voice was a raw, wounded sound ripped from his throat, What in God's name have you done to me, Aurora? My company, my legacy, everything my father, my grandfather built. How could you? How he wasn't just angry. He was utterly bewildered. A god who had woken up to find his worshippers had stolen his temple. Ethelred Capital. What is that? Some pathetic little shell game. Where did you get that kind of money? Did you sell your sad little paintings? He was flailing his insults, lacking their usual precision. His mind, unable to process a reality so far removed from the one he had constructed. Aurora remained perfectly still as his rage washed over her, letting the waves of his fury break against the shores of her composure. She turned from the large window where she had been gazing out at the silhouetted trees and faced him, her expression as serene as the moonlit garden behind her. I believe the correct financial term is a hostile takeover. Radley, she replied, her voice cool and even the calmness of it a stark counterpoint to his hysteria. Don't you dare be clever with me, he roared, taking another step closer. This is my life. You've torched my name, you've dragged through the mud. For what you seem to be under the impression that your name is the only one that matters, Aurora said softly. It's a blind spot you've always had. You never once in all our years together asked about my family, did you? You met my parents at the wedding, saw they were quiet, unassuming academics, and you filed them away. It fit your narrative of me. The bright, pretty, but ultimately unthreatening girl from a modest background whom you could graciously elevate into your world. She paused, letting the truth of her words sink in. You never asked about my grandmother Margaret Price beyond dismissing her pearls as quaint. You never thought to ask who she married. You never thought to ask who Gerald Price was. Radley stared at her, his face a canvas of confusion. The name meant nothing to him. His world was Wall Street and old money. He didn't concern himself with names that didn't appear in the society pages or stock reports. Gerald Price Aurora, continued her voice, a steady, clear indictment of his ignorance, was the founder of Innovate Systems. He was a quiet genius who started the company in his garage in 1982 with two of his friends. He tinkered with code when you were learning to sail in the Hamptons. In the late 90s, just before the dot-com bubble burst, he sold it to a tech giant for a sum that would make your father's inheritance look like pocket money. But he hated the spotlight. He hated people like you. So he put his entire fortune into a diversified, fiercely guarded blind trust for his only grandchild. For me. A trust I gained full control of on my 25th birthday, a year before I met you. The color drained from Radley's face. The physical reaction was stark, as if his very blood were retreating from the devastating scale of his miscalculation. He had married one of the wealthiest heiresses in the country, and had been too arrogant, too profoundly self-absorbed to ever even notice. He had mocked the source of the very power that was now crushing him. I lived a normal life because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I was worth, she said, her voice softening with a flicker of old sorrow. And I genuinely thought for a time that you were that man. I was wrong. You don't love people, Radley. You acquire assets, and when they no longer meet your specifications, you look to replace them. So this is what he choked out, the rage in his voice, finally giving way to a raw, desperate disbelief. This is revenge. Because I was with Victoria. You're destroying my life, our life over a cheap affair. Aurora let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound completely devoid of humor. An affair. Oh, Radley, you are so profoundly small. Do you really think this is about her? Victoria was a symptom, not the disease. She was an embarrassment, a cliché. Tonight, she was a tool. I used her to show you exactly what it feels like to be publicly positioned as someone's property, a decorative object whose fate is decided by others. Did you enjoy the show? His face contorted in shame and humiliation. She had held up a mirror to his own cruelty, and he couldn't stand the reflection. No. Aurora said, her voice dropping, losing its edge, and taking on the weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. This isn't about her. This is about the fact you were running Winslow Industries into the ground with your reckless, ego-driven gambles. The Jakarta deal you pushed through against the board's advice. The one you pursued just to best Gregory Pike. It was a vanity project, and it almost cost the company 9 figures. This is about the fact you treated your employees, people with families and mortgages, as disposable pawns in your corporate games. Most of all, this is about the fact that you saw our son. She placed a firm, protective hand on her belly, not as a child to be loved and nurtured, but as the next CEO. An heir to a brand. Your brand. A toxic, hollow brand that I will not have him associated with. She took another step, closing the final distance between them. He involuntarily flinched, the last of his bravado gone. I didn't destroy your life, Radley. I saved my child's. I secured his legacy. A real one. Not a legacy of flashy watches and public humiliations, but one of integrity, quiet strength, and ethical responsibility. The company is in new hands now. A board that I have selected. A board led by Beatrice Chen. Their mandate is stability and long-term ethical growth, not quarterly headlines. You can't... Aurora, please, he whispered, his rage fully collapsing into a pathetic, desperate plea. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative, foreign. We're married. We can work this out. I was wrong. I was stressed. I'll end it with Victoria for good. We can be a family. You, me, and the baby. We can start over. It was the final, predictable move of a defeated man begging for a grace he had never once extended. Aurora looked down at his hand on her arm, then back to his face, her eyes filled with a deep, weary pity. A family. The time for that is over, Radley. It was over a long time ago. I just hadn't signed the papers yet. My lawyer will be sending your lawyer the divorce petition in the morning. The terms will be non-negotiable. She pulled her arm away. The penthouse, the house in the Hamptons, the jet, they are all assets of Winslow Industries, a company I own. As of an hour ago, while you were on the red carpet, your key cards and access codes were deactivated. You will be given a severance package. A generous one, I'm told. But you will have no role in the company. Your position as CEO has been terminated effective immediately. She turned to leave, the finality of her words hanging in the silent air. What about our son? He asked, his voice cracking the last shred of his identity, clinging to that one biological fact. Aurora paused at the door, her back to him, a silhouette of undeniable power. You will be his father, she said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. You will have supervised visitation rights. But he will not carry your name. He will be a price. He will be raised knowing that a person's worth isn't measured by who they impress at a gala, but by the strength of their character and the kindness in their heart. A lesson you were never, ever equipped to teach. Without looking back, she opened the heavy oak door and walked out. She left him standing alone in the dark, silent corridor, a king deposed in his own palace, stripped of his crown, his company and his name by the quiet, sentimental woman who never quite fit in. As she stepped back into the main hall, the buzz of the crowd washed over her. But this time she didn't shrink from it. She felt the weight of 1,000 stares, but they no longer felt like a judgment. They felt like an acknowledgement. She took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the air of her new reality. It was the first true, unburdened breath she had taken in years. The weight of the diamonds of his expectations of her gilded cage, it was all gone. She was free, and her future and the future of her son was finally hers to write. In the end, the grand theatre of Radley Winslow's life wasn't brought down by a corporate rival or a market crash, but by the quiet queen he had banished to the shadows. Aurora's story serves as a breathtaking lesson in the profound difference between perceived power and actual strength. Radley, a man obsessed with image brands and monetary value, made the fatal error of his life. He could not recognize true worth when it was sleeping beside him every night. He saw his wife's burgeoning pregnancy as a flaw in his aesthetic and dismissed her family pearls as quaint, never realizing those very pearls were a symbol of a legacy that dwarfed his own. His arrogance was a blindness preventing him from seeing the brilliant strategist who was patiently watching his every move. Aurora's victory wasn't a simple act of revenge born from a moment of anger. It was a masterclass in patience, a fortress of a plan built brick by brick with every condescending word and public humiliation she endured. It was fueled not just by the pain of betrayal, but by the fierce protective instinct of a mother refusing to let her child be raised in the shadow of such a toxic and hollow empire. She didn't just take his company. She dismantled his reality using his own stage and his own cruelty as the instruments of his downfall. Her story is a powerful testament to the idea that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it observes, it calculates, and it waits for the perfect moment to declare checkmate. What did you think of Aurora's meticulous and devastating plan? At what moment in the story did you realize she was the one in complete control? We invite you to share your thoughts and debate in the comments below. Was Radley's complete ruin justified, or was it a step too far? If this story of calculated triumph and quiet empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. Share it with anyone in your life who might feel overlooked as a powerful reminder that their moment is coming. And to ensure you don't miss our next story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable tales of justice, karma, and the hidden power that lies within us all.